Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Skeleton Crew. My name is Jen, your host here. And then today I have a guest with me. Her name is Kristin Beinschroth. She's joining me from California. She has lots of different expertise in the field of radiology, but she worked in the clinical aspect, but she's also too in the education role. Kristin is the assistant professor at a university out there. It's the California Baptist University, and she's here to go over like a plethora of things for us that, everyone could take a little stock into working in the field. And then if you're interested in getting into the field. So Kristin, thanks for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So before we delve into, your role in education and stuff, can you give me a little background of yourself and how you landed where you are currently?
Yeah, so I became a technologist back in 2011. I went through a really cool program where I got to do training in a bunch of different modalities as part of my program. And then pretty much right away, I kind of knew I wanted to go into teaching. So my program director kind of identified me for some extra roles and said, you should maybe think about presenting at a conference. And so that's kind of how it started. Is about 3 months after I graduated, I actually presented my capstone project at a state conference for CEUs. And then I just really liked it. So they stayed in contact with me and they actually referred me for a teaching position, like when I had my 2 years certification. Then I started off as an adjunct and now I'm an assistant professor. And so I've been teaching for about 10 years. So as soon as I had my 2 years experience, I really knew that was where I wanted to go, which is not a very typical route for educators in radiology. But yeah, that's my route. And I'm really happy to have done it.
To work in education, then you're required to have 2 years working in the field.
Yeah, so you have to be certified by ART for 2 years to even be able to supervise students in clinical.
Okay.
And then it does depend kind of on like where you work. So the first job that I got was at a community college and they required either a bachelor's with 2 years experience in the field, or you could actually teach with an associate's and 6 years of experience in the field. And then if you're a JCERT accredited program, then there's different criteria. So to be like a full-time faculty, you have to have a bachelor's. To be a clinical coordinator, you have to have a bachelor's. To be a program director, you have to have a master's. So it's a little bit variable, kind of depending on whether you're ABHAS accredited or KHEP accredited or JCERT accredited. But for the most part, all of them want you to at least have a couple years in the field just so that you kind of have that work experience.
Okay. Now I'm going to get a little technical here in terms of you're talking about like the bachelor's and the associates and stuff. Someone like myself, I didn't get into the field of radiology until it was like a second career of mine. My initial degree is in criminology with a minor in sociology. And I worked for 3 years in the field and kind of was like, this isn't for me. I kind of need something different. So I went back to school and I received an associate's in radiography. So I do have a bachelor's, but it's just not in radiography. So do you know like what's required for like bachelor's and associates? Do you have to have a bachelor's in?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in academia, it very rarely matters what your degree is in. The degree is just kind of it's a demonstration with like measurable outcomes that says you can set a goal and achieve it. So it actually doesn't matter. And so a few years ago, the ART started requiring that you have an associate's to be able to even sit for the radiography exam. That associate's you can get it before your program. You can get it during your program. It can be in anything. So really, it doesn't matter what your degree is in. It just matters that you have it. And again, it's just kind of a demonstration of goals and commitments. You could go and teach right now with a bachelor's in basically anything and a couple of years of experience.
Is there anything significant to you that you feel like from the 11 or 12 years that you've been a technologist or teaching in the field that has significantly changed?
Shielding. Oh my gosh. It's funny when that article came out. So the AAPM published an article in March of 2019, I believe, and I got like an advanced copy in my email box. And so I just put it up for my students and I was like, hey, the physicists are saying we shouldn't shield anymore. What do you think about it? Just kind of open up the discussion. And they were like, Professor B, you always told us, like, what do you mean you can't shield? And they were really passionate about like, don't do it. I did a presentation on it just a couple of months later, like, hey, we don't do as much research in our field. The physicists do. And if they're saying we shouldn't do it, what should we do? And so thankfully we have the ASRT that came in and basically said, hey, I don't really want anybody else talking for me if they're not going to do the job. So like if somebody is telling technologists not to do something, we should be the ones that should be saying that. There's still so much misconception. One of the things that I do is I have like a TikTok, Instagram thing where I do radiology education. And last like 3 days ago, my son broke his arm. And so I shared my experience as a parent, not being offered a lead shield and required to stay in the room. And I said, hey, like, what are you doing at your facility? And I got a range of answers about shielding, to the point where a lot of sites have actually thrown away their shields. And so even if a
Wow.
technologist wanted to provide one, they don't have them available, which is insane to me. And it opened up like a whole can of worms. But that has probably been the biggest change that I've seen in my 12 years as a technologist and 10 years as a professor, is just the misconceptions around shielding. And it really all kind of stems from that one article and then a lot of discussion since then.
That's crazy that you can't even get one offered to you. I mean, I feel like for a child,
Yeah.
you shield when appropriate, so that it's not
Yep.
blocking off anatomy. And then, yes, you would always offer an apron to the parent if they're staying in the room, especially if they're
Yeah.
holding. And that would
Yeah.
never
So
even, I mean, I know that there has been the patient who's being shielded, that things have changed, but I don't know, in terms of like a parent being in the room and getting secondary exposure, really, like, why not offer them a shield?
yeah, and it comes down to like my conclusion in like my expertise and my experience is it was just kind of lazy. But, the whole thing with shielding is like when we're having a medical imaging exam, there's always an amount of risk. We know that, it's documented, and we accept that amount of risk because there's a benefit of getting an image that may or may not lead to a diagnosis or even just a rule out, right? But when you're a parent in the room or any ancillary person in the room and you're not getting the image, there is no benefit to outweigh your risk. And so you are protected at even a higher level, or you should be, according to all of our principles. So yeah, I'm still a little miffed about it. I'm like, what just happened? And as a tech, I don't want to go in there and be like, I'm a technologist, because I don't want
Right.
to encroach on them. Like, I'm very secretive. And so I didn't say anything. And now I kick myself in the moment because I really should have said something. But it's a weird thing. Like, I don't want to come off as arrogant or come off as know-it-all. And,
Right.
I always broach that really quietly. And the thing is too, with social media, with cancel culture, like, you never know what's going to be recorded, what's going to be shared. And like, I would imagine, I know in my practice, I'm very much on my toes, like always on my P's and Q's, because again, you never know like who somebody is or who's watching or who's listening on the other side of the door. And
Mhm.
we've learned that, like, having conversations in an elevator about protected health information and how that's led to all these cases, it was really interesting to have somebody just kind of so blatantly just disregard it. It's interesting. I'm still emotionally dealing with it, I think. And it's silly because it's small, but it's like the core of who I am and what I'm passionate about and what I've dedicated the last 15 years of my life to. It's funny how much it's still eating at me.
What's your take on, talking about shielding? I was looking at the page that talks about the change in the shielding for babies, like gonadal shielding. The babies can be so squirmy in the NICU to begin with. And then
Yeah.
you have this medallion sized gonadal shielding that I feel like the nurses they feel so strongly about, like, you need to go get the shield for the baby. And for me,
Yeah.
I'm kind of almost like, it's going to end up in the abdomen and it's going to end up blocking whatever they're looking for. Because I feel like the babies in the NICU, you're looking for line placement and stuff like that, but sometimes they think that they might have like a bowel obstruction. Or what's your feeling on that?
Yeah. So my thing is abdomen and pelvis, especially under ASRT guidelines. And that's my driving force, is like, what does the ART say? Because that's my certification and they can revoke it if I don't do what I'm told, type of thing. And then the ASRT, I have a ton of faith in the professionals that work with them. And I always kind of just follow theirs. And what they say is that abdomen and pelvis don't shield anymore, but all other exams we still need to shield. So the one thing with NICU is like, it's an infection control thing, right? So you can't just pull like your gonadal shield off the portable and put it on the babies because it hasn't been cleaned appropriately. And so they usually have that dedicated shield. that dedicated shield goes missing really easily. And so there are other ways that I can protect my patients from radiation without necessarily using a shield every single time. And so I rely on those. And the whole reason that the AAPM said stop shielding is because their data revealed that like 67% of the time it actually increased dose because it was in the anatomy and we had to repeat. Or in really, really lazy scenarios, it was actually on an AEC cell. And so it actually bumped up. And I get that. I actually added that as a lab for my students to prove to them like how important it is. Feasibility too is, as a professor, my job is to teach you best practices. But the truth is that best practices are not necessarily perfect in every scenario, and it's not necessarily feasible every time. And there's lots of pressures from time management to throughput to there's an ER physician yelling at you to get it done faster. Like there's all of these things. And so I always try to make my students know, like, I'm going to teach you best practices and know that that's not always going to be the case. But again, like shielding is only one part of radiation protection. And there's so many other ways that I can protect that baby without necessarily using a shield when there's concern that it would cover something in the abdomen. I think that's the other thing too, is we really have to hold on to our common sense and our critical thinking that we work so hard to develop. And I think that is the hardest thing to teach, the hardest thing to hold people accountable for, and also the most important part of being a tech.
In some cases, there's an exception to the rule, and it's having to deviate.
Exactly.
And being a technologist, I have found that more times than not, you're slightly deviating from what your norm is of what you were taught because of patient circumstances or environment that you might be in. Say if you're working in a hospital and, patients in an ICU bed or something, you need to know how to think on your feet and deviate from the norm if you need to.
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing at the end. Like you hit the nail on the head, is the goal at the end. What is the goal of what I'm doing right now? I can't get so focused on what I'm doing that I forget why I'm doing it. And so if you're always just kind of keeping the why in the back of your brain, you're going to have the skills to be able to make the best choice for every patient, because that's what equity is too, is making sure that I'm making the best choice for each individual patient and not just lying these like blanket practices on everybody, because we're all different. We have different needs.
So we've talked about the changes that you've seen since you've become a technologist and become certified. But since you've been in the education role, what changes have you seen and what changes have you made in possibly your curriculum for the program that you're a part of?
This is such a great question. So in higher education, there's all of these trends towards making it easier. Our students today have lower resilience, lower grit. They have lower life skills than generations before them because of things like helicopter parenting and attachment parenting. And I'm such a helicopter parent, so I will fall into that. I'm not talking about you guys. I am one of you. So our students come in, our students are less prepared. They're less likely to start driving at 16. When I was 16, it was like, I wanted that driver's license so quick. Some of my students to this day, 20, 21, 22 years old, still get dropped off every morning. Driving isn't as important. It's like an independence thing. It's just not as important. The other thing is our students are much less prepared as far as prerequisites go. So I'm spending a lot more time kind of remediating, getting them up to where they should be coming into the program, because prerequisite courses, again, it's like break down barriers, make it easier. What can we do to help them? And unfortunately, that takes away their responsibility in it. I spend a lot more time getting students up to speed. And then there is more pressure in academia altogether of like, how can we make college easier? And as a teacher and as somebody who has very much benefited from a lot of education, I'm like, absolutely, let's make college more accessible to all. However, let's not change the standards that they have to meet, because in the end, our students in particular are going to go out there and have somebody's life in their hands at some point. Maybe in diagnostic x-ray, you're not puncturing somebody's artery in a surgery case, but in the end, like there is lots of moments in my career where a decision I have made could very much have impacted somebody's life and like their actual living. So the hard part is that as an educator, you have to be willing to go up against administration and kind of even just higher education in general and say, I can't remit on this one. Yes, I want the student to be successful and I want them to pass their classes, and I'll go out of my way to help bring them to where they need to be. But in the end, they have to meet the standard. And if they don't meet the standard, they can't do this. That's tough. That is really tough because most administrators are not technologists. Even our leadership team is like a very good blend of a bunch of different health science, and the only technologist in our entire college are the 3 faculty that work in my program. It's really up to us to be the expert in the field, to inform them of like what radiology is, what it looks like, what our accreditors are asking for, what our certification requires, and be the advocates to sometimes make those bad decisions or like those tough decisions and say, hey, this one's not working out. We got to let them go. It's a tough time to be an educator. I will say I love it, but it is a tough time because there is so much pressure in higher education in general to like make it easier. And radiology school is not easy by virtue of the fact that the job is not easy.
The prerequisites to get into the program, I remember that I was required to have anatomy and physiology 1 and 2. That was the only like science requirement. As I had said, I had a bachelor's degree prior to entering into my program. So I actually had everything else covered. All I needed to take were those 2 classes. And I think I had to take like public speaking because that wasn't required at my previous university. But the requirement, is it just those 2 that they need to get it to be able to apply to the program, or do you require them to also to have maybe like English and math or something like that?
It does vary from program to program, but for the most part, like if you have anatomy and physiology, that kind of shows that you've already had biology and chemistry as well. Typically, like in the programs that I've worked for, consulted for, we had to do biology, chemistry, physics is a big one. So I think I took like 11 physics classes altogether between my prerequisites and my program. A higher level math, so like trigonometry or pre-calculus is usually required. I had to take a psychology class, just like a Psych 101 of understanding human thought processes and actions. It does kind of vary, but it is very science driven, but there's usually some humanities in there as well, just to kind of, the public speaking makes sense to me. I don't think that was required in my program, and it's not required in the one I work in now, but that is a really good fundamental thing that you need, is effective communication practices when you're working with the public. So they do vary, but they're mostly science driven. And then the rest of that we kind of cover in the program.
This episode is brought to you by xraytechnicianschools.com. If you're considering a career in X-ray, visit xraytechnicianschools.com to explore schools and to get honest information on career paths, salaries, and degree options.
Are you able to suggest things be added to the curriculum since you're professor, assistant professor? I mean, I know that you probably have a guideline of what you need to follow based off of JCERT or, like you said, whoever is the accreditation for the program, but is there anything specific that you have added into the curriculum?
Yeah, so the things that I've added into my courses, I will say too, I work at a private university, so our curriculum is not as like cut and dry as public universities are. So I actually have a ton of flexibility in my classes, and that's one of the cool kind of unique things about my job. But I've added all kinds of things. So I've added quality control testing into our labs. I've added a bunch of radiation, like radiobiology principles, which some of them are required just under the ASRT curriculum and under JCERT requirements, but I've added kind of more of those. And there's new positioning procedures that we've added. There's just lots of things. So one of the things I teach, and I've taught pretty much in both programs that I work for 10 years, is pharmacology and venipuncture. In California, we actually have to have a separate certificate showing that we're certified to do IVs. It's like a whole thing. I teach that for the state. I teach it in my program, and I also taught it as an adjunct in another program. And one of the big things that comes up in pharmacology is pharmacogenetics. So pharmacogenetics is kind of your predisposition to maybe metabolize drugs faster or slower, be sensitive to certain drugs. And so that's one of the things that has now been added in the national curriculum because it is so important and because we can actually do pharmacogenetic testing. It's always kind of been known. So people with red hair, redheads, happen to have a higher tolerance for like pain medication. And so typically you have to give them more lidocaine or more bupivacaine. And now there's like scientific data that supports that, not just anecdotal evidence. It's so interesting.
It's really interesting.
Isn't it? And just being friends with a redhead or whatever is kind of how it came up. And then, of course, I'm just like a data nerd. So I'm like, I'm going to go research this. And I was like, oh, there's actual studies that show, and it all has to do with pharmacogenetics.
All right. So kind of wanted to go back to a portion of our conversation that you had briefly mentioned, that you do educational TikToks and Instagrams, or like reels on those. What's this all about?
So it's funny. I'm just like a goober. Like one of the things that I value the most is like vulnerability and just being yourself. You know, a lot of things in radiology are pretty curated because you do have to kind of be careful. And about a year and a half ago, some friends of mine made a podcast and have great success from it. It's called Catheter Jockeys. It's some RAs and technologists, and they're just the most lovely humans, and I love them. So shout out to you guys. But one of them was like, hey, you should think about making your videos public. Because I had already just kind of made funny videos about like MRI schedulers or like BE schedulers. And they said, can you make your profile public? And I was like, oh, no. I don't feel comfortable with that. Just like putting my kids out there. And so they said, well, why don't you open a business account? And so I've been doing that. And I've had the most incredibly positive response from that. And social media also, like, it can go either way very quickly. I'm really lucky that I've had the positive outreach in that, but my focus is just education. I want to take something that's really difficult for you to understand in class that maybe you don't have a lot of time on because we have to cover so much. And then I want to break it down into something totally digestible, like a 1-sentence explanation of what is the inverse square law. Because I think that based on learning and human learning, if you can break down a very large topic into a 1-sentence definition, you got the core of what's important. That's what I do. I just do silly videos, and I usually don't have makeup on, and my hair's a mess. And because again, I'm a mom, and like that's the only time I can do it. And that's usually what I look like. But I try to take like really hard, difficult topics in radiologic sciences education and then make them more digestible so that for some reason, students will remember them.
Do you ever share these like while you're in class? Oh, by the way, or do you say like sometimes like maybe you're like, hey, check out my TikTok account, you know, if you're having a hard time with any of the information?
Yeah, it's funny because now like my students know about it. I don't tell them like on the first day of class, follow this or whatever, just because like that's not what it's there for me. But I will mention, they'll say, do you have any tips for your first day of clinical? And I was like, oh yeah, there's a TikTok about that. I don't know where it is, but you could probably look it up. And I'm hesitant to use them in class just because I don't want to feel braggy or feel like I'm pushing my own initiative or whatever with my students. But a lot of them usually already know me before they get in the program. Like they recognize me from TikTok before they become my student. Every once in a while, I'll throw one in there. But for the most part, and again, like I get so much time with my students because I teach about 75% of the classes in my program, just how things are kind of written. But my biggest thing that I love about it is that I'm able to help students in other programs kind of understand principles. So that's kind of my goal with it, but it comes up. It definitely comes up.
What are your tips for first days of clinicals?
So first of all, like bring a light lunch because you don't know if you're going to have a locker or access to a fridge or whatever. So like bring a very small lunch that doesn't need to be refrigerated. Bring as little as possible because you don't know if you're going to have a locker or somewhere to set it. Don't bring your books on the first day because some places are really cool with you studying during downtime and some places are like, absolutely not. I never want to see you do that. And then have something to write with and a small notebook. The biggest thing too is like reach out to a student who's already at that site before your first day. Find out like what's traffic like, where do you park? What's the cafeteria like? Is it worth buying lunch there or should I bring my own? And just like simple things, but stay humble. Know that one of the worst things you can do is say like, well, that's not the way my professor taught me. I'm like, again, best practice and then real life.
Right.
So, you know, like be humble and come prepared. And then just know we beat this like a dead horse, but it is a 2-year interview and it is so hard to dial back a bad first impression than it is to like build on a good first impression. So just be humble and kind and positive and try to put your best foot forward and then know that you're going to make a mistake and just own up to it, apologize, and then, you know, work against that bad impression because we can't control what people think of us, but we can control the data that they get to form their opinions. I can't make anybody like me, but what I can make is like an undeniable niceness and professionalism and courtesy and kindness. Like I can do that. And then if they don't like me, that's on them. Like that's your problem, bro. That's not my problem, bro. Yeah, those are my tips and tricks for your first day. Just come prepared, be ready to say yes a lot, try not to say no, and reach out to somebody who's already there that can kind of give you the insider perspective as a student. Because some places are really great to be as a student, and then a lot of places are really tough to be as a student. And so knowing that ahead of time helps.
So we were talking about you doing the TikTok thing and how you can incorporate that into education. Are there any other like digital tools that you use in some of your classes?
Yeah, I'm a super innovative teacher, and I actually had to like go to bat for a couple like apps that I want to use, but one of them I use is an app called Explain Everything. And so this really helped me going into COVID, because what it is like you upload your PowerPoint into it and then you link it, like we just did it as like an Apple AirPlay thing. So my PowerPoint is on, it's recording my voice, and it's recording all of whatever I'm writing on the PowerPoint via an iPad. And so I was using that before COVID. And actually, I got some pushback from my program like, hey, if you're using it, the students are going to expect us to use it, and we don't want to. And I'm like, totally fine. I can just be really upfront and clear that this is only my classes, my choice, my academic freedom to do this, and don't expect it from other professors. Mm-hmm. What that did is when COVID happened and we shifted to remote instruction immediately, my students were already used to accessing recordings afterwards. They were already used to using the platform. And so my transition to online learning was flawless. I mean, just absolutely no problems. It was easy for me and for my students. And I can say that my colleagues really struggled more because they weren't used to using those things. Mm-hmm. The other thing I use a lot of is Clover Learning. It's just one of the most comprehensive. It used to be called RadTech Bootcamp, and now they're kind of rebranding. But that's one of the most comprehensive tools that I use on an individual basis, on a classroom basis. We adopted it as a program. Finally, this year we adopted it. And so my students have been using it forever, but now I use it. YouTube is really great. There's actually a content creator named Megan Peretti that my students swear by. And after like 15 of them said, oh, she helped me so much with her videos, I was like, okay, then we're going to use those. And then I use just like silly things like flippity.net, where I can make games out of content and just try to make it a little bit more digestible. Trying to make physics fun is not fun. Right. And so anything I can use, I do it, but I am a very innovative teacher. And I will say, like, I am definitely the minority in education because that stuff takes a lot of time out of my day. Mm-hmm. And many people don't have time to invest that in just like building like this year I did it, an escape room for ethics. It was like a Google form and students had to answer these questions. They couldn't make it to the next section until they answered this one correctly. And then so it's kind of like, but that was a long process. And it was me reaching out to my teaching and learning center, which is like the support system for teachers where I work. And also my colleagues like, hey, have you ever done this? And then finding ethical scenarios that were valid and reliable. And it was a long process and it takes a lot of time. So I know that most teachers don't have time to do that, but I happen to have a really cool role where I'm not a coordinator and I'm not a director. I'm primarily teaching, and those are rare. Those are extremely rare. I come up to people and they're like, never leave that job. It's like, those don't exist. Like, keep it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, so you have a little bit more flexibility with your time of where you want to direct it to. So that's nice. Do you feel like maybe you're using digital tools like this? Are your cohorts or the other faculty members, or are they in the same age range of you, or maybe they're a little bit older?
Yeah, so my colleagues are typically much older than me, and completely different generationally, even like just completely different kind of socially. That is more common in radiology. Most people retire into education or kind of fall into it. And I was really intentional. I started teaching at 27, and that was like the path that I chose, but I'm rare. I will say that most days I relate more to my students than I do to my colleagues, just generationally, because I am closer in age to them, and socially I'm much closer to them. That's also kind of an area where I have faced some challenges in trying to, just implement new innovative things, is that most people in my discipline are like, nah, that's not something I'm comfortable with. So it's a challenge.
So to move from talking about your innovationness of you using digital tools and stuff like that, we were also talking before we started recording about you were awarded a scholarship for the program that you work at. And then an interesting tidbit that went along with it that you said, there's so much free money out there, but people just aren't accessing it. So one, can we first talk about the scholarship? What did you apply for and maybe what the criteria was, and then what the end result was for your program, the benefit?
Yeah, so I am part of ASSERT, which is the Association of Collegiate Educators in Radiologic Technology. It is one of 2 organizations dedicated specifically to teachers and students in medical imaging. So that organization has scholarships available for students and one for faculty. So I've always encouraged my students to apply. I sit on one of the committees that actually reviews the scholarship applications. And then when I decided to go back for my doctorate, I was now a student and also a faculty. And so I applied for this scholarship, and it's actually given by Elsevier, which is the publisher for most of the books that I use in my classes. It's a faculty development scholarship, and they give it 1 out a year, and it's chosen through the ASSERT organization, but it's sponsored by Elsevier. And in doing that, I found out just how few people apply for them. And so the year that I got it, I found out inadvertently, I was the only person that applied for it. And I was like, you could have left that one out, but that's okay. It's okay. Just it hurt to my ego more than anything. But so many people don't apply for those. A lot of us don't necessarily go back for higher education in radiology because it doesn't always lead to a difference in our job or a difference in our pay. Like, we don't get a raise just because we have a bachelor's. In most cases. I will say that education is really required in academia. That piece of paper is everything, and they want everybody to have a terminal degree. And I will say, without that push, I probably would not have gotten my PhD. But because of that, I feel super prepared, and I'm so grateful that I did it. The really nice thing about the ASRT scholarships, they have streamlined this process and made it so wonderful. There is one application, and they apply for you to all of these different things. They basically show which ones you're qualified for, and then they submit your application for that particular scholarship. So one of the big ones through the ASRT that's great for students is the Student to Leadership Development Program. It's been around since 2011. I was actually a part of that. I was one of the first recipients to get that scholarship. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to go to the House of Delegates meeting, expenses paid. And it is just such a great process to see like the voting and the intensity that happens on the floor of the delegates. But now it's a 3-year program. It has evolved into much more. And so students get access to all of these modules that you would normally have to reapply and get accepted into it, like the leadership program and the online advocacy program and all of these things that the ASRT offers to its members. But usually you have to apply and be accepted. As a student, you can get that. We basically give 2 scholarships per state. So 2 students every year get chosen for that. And then it usually carries you into your first year or 2 as a technologist. So now you're connected to a mentor. You get assigned a personal mentor. You get connected to all of these students and now technologists across the country. And so your network grows like crazy without really having to do the footwork yourself. But even in that, so I sit on our state affiliate board, and we review the applications to decide which 2 students in California get the scholarship. I mean, if we get 5 applicants, that's a great year. It's amazing to me how much free money is out there to help you achieve your personal goals and dreams and aspirations. And that people, I think part of it is people don't know about them. Second is like, I got to write an essay. I don't want to write an essay. I get that. But it is free money. And a lot of times we're giving it to somebody that maybe wouldn't be our best first choice because they're the only one that applied for it.
Right. When did you complete your PhD?
I'm in dissertation phase. So I'm what's called ABD, which just means all but dissertation. I'm one of those. I'm an overachiever and I'm like very time oriented. So I started my classes in summer of 22 and I finished all the classes in summer of 23. Now I'm in dissertation phase. I actually defend my proposal next week. And then I'll have 2 semesters to collect my data. I'm actually going to be working with the ASRT because they very graciously will distribute your survey for you. So I'm studying moral courage and professional confidence in radiologic sciences students and how they affect achievement outcomes. How do they affect their likelihood of success in the program and like GPA and stuff? There's such limited research on radiologic sciences students. We always kind of get lumped in with like nursing, and we do double the clinical hours of a nurse. So it really is different. And then we also get lumped in with like respiratory or medical assisting. And again, like our programs are very rigorous. My whole goal is to defend why we shouldn't get lumped in with them, why we should be studied on our own, and then inspiring technologists to get into research because it is really daunting. But otherwise, we have other people talking for us about us in a job that they've never done. So it's just super important that we take over.
So on your survey, that would be you come up with them with questions, and will they be like a multiple choice or will it be like a free text that someone can answer?
Yeah, so I'm using existing instruments. There is a person in Finland who developed a nurse's moral courage scale. So I'm actually using an abridged version of that. Okay. And then there's another person who developed a confidence in managing challenging situations scale, again, for nurses. And so my first part is going to be doing a survey to figure out which of these instruments, or like the items, the questions on the instrument, best pertains to radiologic sciences. And then once I send out the survey, it'll be a Likert scale. So it'll be like, does not describe me at all to describes me very well, and kind of like a range. And then there will be kind of some open-ended question at the end, but because I'm using existing instruments and I'm not making my own, I kind of have to stick to their structure to make sure that it's valid and reliable. But I'm super excited I've done preliminary focus groups and preliminary testing with other students. And they're like really excited about, wow, nobody's ever asked me that before. And I was like, exactly.
That's great. I mean, good luck with that. Wow.
Thank you.
It seems like so much work that you'll be doing, and obviously it has a great outcome, but just so much, dedication and time putting into it. Yeah.
It's a lot of work. I'm fully drowning. Like my head is so below the water at this point with my workload and my family and this and everything, but everything is temporary and nothing worth having doesn't come without hard work. I'm willing to do it, and I know it'll be good in the end.
What advice would you give to, a prospective student who might be coming into radiology, and then also to the students who are graduating and moving into the workforce?
Yeah. So to prospective students, like my number one advice is do it. It's tough, but it is so worth it. I can sell my job like a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves. There are so many ways that you can go with it. Like there's so many different career choices. In the end, I never, ever worry about not having a job at some point. And that is a very real concern these days. And it's because like, I know I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. So it's very rewarding. It's a tough job, but it's very rewarding. And I highly recommend it to anybody. And the other part of that too is like, it's really good for introverts because our interactions with patients are usually 15 minutes or less. Right. So if you're one of those people that struggles with social interactions, I call myself an introvert. I am what I would say a paid extrovert because of the job that I chose. I tend to be extroverted, but at the end of the day, I just want to go home and be alone. So it's good for people that kind of are introverted. It's good for people that want to help. And, so many people have that heart of service. It's good for people that are artistic because there very much is an art to what we do. And you can see the results of if you position something just a little bit differently, you see it. It's very techy. It's very like innovative. So if you're kind of one of those technology people, you'll like it. So it's just good for a group of people that is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And then for students entering the workforce is don't do what you see other people do just because they're doing it. There's so much of what I would term laziness, not following best practices, not doing what we know to be right, what we believe to be right, just purely because of like pressure or I didn't have time to do it or whatever. And know that a huge amount of radiology workforce is retiring in the next 5 to 10 years. Like we are a very I'm not going to say old, but there are a lot of highly progressed people in age that are the front runners in radiology. And we need people, myself included, like I know that I'm going to have to give up one day and I want somebody to take my place. Know that like you're taking on that responsibility and that you're going to have to replace these really powerhouse people that have stood up and done what's right for the last 60 years and are tired now, and just be willing to be that person and to stand up for what's right and advocate and kind of get loud when you need to. It's a really good time to be a technologist too, because we have a lot more recognition than we used to because of things like podcasts, like Skeleton Crew and Catheter Jockeys and Collaboration RA, but also because the ASRT is launching their PR campaign that they've invested a ton of time and resources in. And so it's a great time to be a tech because we're finally getting some recognition for what we do and the fact that we're not nurses. I hope that inspires people to, keep standards high and be willing to take over when all of these kind of powerhouse techs retire. And so many people have delayed retirement purely because they don't feel like there's somebody that they can hand it off to. And, everybody deserves to retire. We shouldn't live to work. We should work to live. I want to work enough that I can live a life that gives me joy. And then I want to go and live that life. Like balance is really important to me. And I don't want to work forever. That is not my goal. I want to work until I can retire. And then I want to travel and be with my grandkids and all that. So
great. All right. So let's end on that note. Kristin, thank you so much for taking the time for being with me today. Everybody, Kristin Beinschroth. Did I say that right?
Beinschroth, but it's good enough.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. I had
it's okay.
My head from earlier. Kristin taking the time out of her busy schedule between her dissertation and being an assistant professor and a mom, giving your insight and your tips and tricks. I really do appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoyed our conversation today. And if you haven't checked out other episodes, go back and look at the different episodes. We have a slew of different guests that have been on, and we talk about all different types of topics. So, all right, we'll see everybody soon. Thank you so much. This is Jen and Kristin.
Thank you.
You've been watching The Skeleton Crew, brought to you by xraytechnicianschools.com. On the next episode, join us to explore the present and the future of the rad tech career in the field of radiology.